All right, we got some new emails here. Let's see who this is from. From Skivity67 is asking us if we can do a little tour of Krita. I think we can do that. Yeah, let's do a little overview of Krita.
Okay, let's do a basic overview of Krita. At least the essential parts of it. Krita is an open source painting program. It's sort of like Photoshop, but it's open source, which means that it's free and that it runs on everything. And you can download it right here at krita.org. You can get it for any platform. It even runs really well on old stuff, old computers. The engineering is really good. And I used Photoshop for a long time. And now I use this. And I prefer it. And you see the layout is pretty conventional, like pretty much any other paint program. You got most of your tools here on the left. Your selections and your brushes and your shapes and whatnot. And at the top, you've got your file management, and you've got your pull-down menus. And then on the right, you've got your palette, your layers, and then various settings that are tool specific. And it's super configurable because, again, it's open source, so they don't care what you do with it. You can change this configuration to whatever you want. And you can see you've got this whole selection here of dockers that we can be adding to reconfigure this layout. So, yeah, it's very, very configurable. Oh, wait. We have a caller here. Who's this? Oh, hi. Hi, how's it going? You have a question? Everybody get that? The question was, how do the brushes work? Good question. Yes, let's take a look at the brushes. The brushes are up here in this little menu. And we come to this palette here. And so these are all the brushes that come with it. And it's a pretty good selection. And we can test them out on this little notepad over here. You can sort of test out each one of these brushes and see if we like it. And you notice we have this menu here for engines. So this is another thing in Krita which is really nice, is that the brush engine is modular. And you can introduce your own brush type in it as a developer and have your own settings that are unique to your brush type. So for example, the pixel brush type, if I select this, gives us these settings. Quite a few of them here. But if I go to, say, a clone type, so this is a brush that only is a clone tool. And so I have settings which are unique to that kind of a tool. I have a deformation engine. And I have color smudge brushes. This is another brush class. And you see all of these have the little water droplet next to them. And the brushes with the water droplet smudge. Sort of like oil. So you can see I can paint with it, but if I change the pressure just a little bit, I can also smudge it and blend it. So all of these brush types will do that. And here we have the smudge tool, just for smudging. Here's a hatching brush. Yeah, that's great. And you can also import brushes. For example, I can import Photoshop brushes, or I can also import brushes from GIMP, or just from PNG swatches. So the brush engine is quite elegant and better than Photoshop's in a number of ways. Photoshop, hasn't really updated their brush engine since early 2000s. It's a bit overdue. So also, you have brushes you can select off of your floating window here. And this is a little quick menu that opens up. And you can put your favorites, like your favorite brushes on here. Or you can just search through these by type. So this little tag icon right here will let me select all of these different tags. For example, if I select paint, these are all brushes that are, paint simulating brushes. Or if I go to ink, these are all the ink brushes. And they are tagged as they are over here. So the brushes have tags which are listed right here. So if I select ink right here, then these are all of my ink brushes right here. But I like to have a section here for my favorites, where I take the brushes which I use most frequently, so I don't have to mess around going through a whole list of brushes. I can just pick my favorites off of this list, my favorites, and I can have that appear right there. I can just pick them right like that. Some other things which are nice and configurable is you have the in-program adjustment for your pressure, so you can fine-tune it independent of the Wacom driver. But I'm on Linux, so I'm using an open source driver anyway. I'm using the Linux driver. But anyway, we have another option to offset that pressure setting. Also, this is really nice. You can set the type of cursor you're using. So right now I have it set to show an outline, but that my brush is now. So now my cursor is the size of the brush, but I can also just turn it off completely, and that's really nice if you're using a tablet or a Cintiq. You can turn that off. The layers over here, I can add layers with this button right here. I just have these two layers. The layers have different types. So there's a paint layer, which is what I'm using right now. I can paint on it. But I have a different type of layer I need to use if I'm, say, going to put text on it. Or if I'm going to put any vectorized controls on it. Then I would need a specific type of layer just for that one thing. That's a little bit different from some other programs. And I really like the palette. The palette is scalable. I can scale it to a large size for really fine-grained control. And I can also change its configuration depending on what you like. You can use a radial palette if you want. I prefer to use this one right here. So I use this palette type across all of my programs. Now up here you have your symmetry controls. So if I click this on, then I have horizontal symmetry, or if I click this one, I get some vertical symmetry. Here's for managing selections. I can make a selection and then move it. Does everything. Oh wait, we have another caller here. Hello? Hi, what's your question? Uh-huh, okay. Got that? Alright, the question was, What are the essential hotkeys that we should know? Good question. Yeah, it's always good to know hotkeys or key commands for stuff. Because I want to, when I'm working, I want to be sort of fluid in my workflow. I don't want to be messing around with menus and stuff like that. So we'll remember some of the basic key commands and then just sort of lean on those. By the way, the key commands are configurable as well. And if I go into the settings under keyboard shortcuts, you'll see I can tell it to emulate the keyboard shortcuts for some other programs, including Photoshop and Clip Studio. But I'll just keep it at default for now. So these essentials here, number one is B. The B key is for brush, and if I select B, it will take me to brush mode. The E key is for erase. So if I push E, now my brush turns into an eraser. If I push it again, now it's back to brush. So I'm not switching brushes, it's the same brush, but when I press E, it transfers it to a different mode, which is negative mode. And if I hit E again, brings it back, or if I hit B, brings it back to brush mode. The brush size, I can change the brush size by pushing Shift and dragging. So, whoops. Shift, drag is size. So I push Shift and I drag left and right, and it gets bigger and smaller. Or I can also use the bracket keys. The bracket keys will also make it bigger or smaller. There too. The eyedropper is the control key. Now this is something you're always going to want. So be able to pick the color anywhere on the page. And I always want to have my eyedropper close by so I can lift a color. So, and that's control. Eyedropper or color picker. To zoom, I use the middle mouse wheel here, and I can zoom in and out. And also, if I push down the middle mouse button, I can scroll or pan, which I can also do with the keyboard. So keyboard and middle mouse button are both panning. So space or middle mouse equals pan. And then wheel equals zoom. Tab will turn my menus on and off. Sometimes I just need to take them off. So tab, I think it's the same in Photoshop, is to toggle the menus. M is mirror. So I can flip the picture. Really nice to have that. And then to bring up the quick menu here, I am using the right mouse button. Or I've also mapped the right mouse button onto my stylus. So I just tap that and it pops right up. But you can, again, you can program that to any to anything you want. And then when that pops up, I also have rotational controls on that. So now I can rotate. I can also mirror here. Here's this is the equivalent for the mirror switch. And this will bring it back to where it was. And I have my own tiny palette in here, which is kind of convenient also. I don't necessarily have to go back to this palette. especially if I'm in full screen mode, I get a mini palette right there. Very useful. Oh, we have another caller here. Hello? Hi, what's your question? Uh-huh. Differences. Did everybody get that? The question was, what are some of the other differences between this and Photoshop? Good question. So some of the other differences, there are some really nice ones here, some nice upgrades in this from Photoshop. And one of them is that the brush menu has so many more settings. Even some of these simpler brushes have probably 3 times the adjustment potential as you have in the Photoshop menu. Like the Photoshop menu looks kind of like this. Like you don't really have that many settings, and they haven't improved this in decades, which is kind of baffling to me. But also, you see every single one of these settings here has its own unique pressure response curve, and that is totally unique. So I can have a different pressure response on the rotation of this brush than, say, the opacity. Or say there's a size change by pressure, I can have that response be better or be different rather than this curve. So we can fine-tune brush types which are just not possible in Photoshop. And also, something which seems kind of simple, I don't know, I'm not a programmer, so maybe it's hard to do this. But there's a setting in here for the spacing. And when you make a brush stroke, you have little samples of your brush head, and the spacing of those shows how much distance there is from one sample to the next. And sometimes you have to adjust this to optimize your system. If your brush is really heavy and it's slowing your system down, you might have to increase the spacing. Or if I get a really smooth brush, if the spacing is very low, but it eats up a lot of CPU power. But in Krita you have auto spacing, which will automatically manage that spacing to optimize the brush on the fly. That's really nice. Nice thing that Photoshop doesn't have. Also, another difference here is in Krita you have layer types, which are a bit different from Photoshop's. So if I click down here and I want to make a new layer, if I want to paint on something, I have to make a paint layer. Like that's a specific type of layer that I can paint on. But if I'm going to clone something, if I'm going to use a clone brush, I have to use the clone brush on its own layer type. I can't do it on the paint layer. And then if I'm adding text, I have to do it on a vector layer. A filter layer is sort of like an adjustment layer where you can put your color correction. And a file layer is sort of like a smart object where you can embed an entire project within one layer. And then a transparency mask is sort of like the clipping mask in Photoshop. I add a transparency mask. It works pretty similar, but it looks a little bit different. Just takes a little getting used to, but so I can paint on that mask, and it's non-destructive, so I can reveal it again. And so this is what the mask looks like. So then if I just delete that mask, then yeah, everything's back. And that's one thing, this is one thing which doesn't translate well, because if you save or import a Photoshop file, which you can do, in Krita. Krita can save and load Photoshop documents, but the transparency masks usually get broken. Otherwise, it seems to translate pretty well. But there's just a few things that don't come across. Otherwise, you can see it has enormous file format support. Because it supports tons of stuff. Another super important thing that this does that Photoshop doesn't is it works much better in high color depth. So, you know, for example, in Photoshop, what the hell is this? It works much better in high color depths. So here I'm running an 8-bit integer right now. You know, and you can do this in Photoshop. Photoshop you can run in 16-bit integer and 32-bit float. But it doesn't work well. You lose a lot of functionality like this. You see some of the functions won't work on Photoshop in 32-bit because they were engineered for 16-bit. You can see in Photoshop when I switch over to 32-bit, I lose a certain amount of functionality. Not everything works in 32-bit. In Krita, everything works on a 32-bit in 32-bit float. And I'm able to do matte paintings and really high bit depth compositing in this because it can handle the color depth in a way that's better than Photoshop. Oh, another thing which this does better than Photoshop is this smudging is so much better. You know, we have this smudge tool. It's a little paper cone here. And I have to click on overlay mode right here. In Photoshop, this is called sample all layers. But in Krita, I have to click on overlay mode so that it will see all the layers in the smudging. It'll smudge all the layers together. So when I smudge, you can see it's pretty fast. Here, I'm in 32-bit also. Here, let me downgrade it back to 8-bit, since that's what we're normally working in. All right, so here, let me add a few layers here of stuff. And in Krita, I can smudge them now very well. It smudges very fast. And here's smudging in Photoshop. It's utterly unusable. And again, they could have fixed this 20 years ago, and they just chose not to. And they're not going to. They're not going to fix this. It's been too long. So, yeah, and Krita works great. I would use it here all the time. Oh, we have one more caller here. Hello? Ugh. This guy. Yes? You have a question? Of course you don't. You're just here to be weird and stare at me. Well, thank you, but no thanks. Okay, bye. Alright. I hate that guy. Sorry. Is there anyone else out there who has a question who's not an animal? Alright, well, here, why don't we paint something real quick and just sort of test out these controls here. So here's Egypt. Alright, so I'm going to make a new layer, and you see this is a paint layer. So we have another paint layer, and we have some pyramids. Why don't we paint out one of these pyramids? So, you know, with the control key, I'm going to select the color of that ground, and just extend it as if that pyramid were never there. And of course we'll have to remove its shadow as well. just turn this layer on and off, see how it's doing. Alright, all gone. I'll sort of paint in a little bit of texture here. So we know that the shadows are very aggressively going this way. So any kind of like imperfection or feature on the dirt here is going to cast a long shadow to the right. Maybe there's little roads in here. Flip it. Flip it from time to time. Oh, here, let's use a texture. I'll switch over to a pastel brush with some grain to it. Just brush a little bit of grit. This is the pencil brush right here. Pencil brush. Oh, this is another type of brush. The brushes that have these little arrows on them. These are brushes that will rotate. So if I swivel the stylus, then I can rotate this brush. That's kind of nice. And here, let's put something here in its place. Why don't we put I'll put a smaller building here. It has to obey the same lighting. Here, I can just select the color right off of this pyramid. Here, we'll make a real tiny one. We'll put like a real tiny porta potty here in place of this pyramid. Yeah. Pharaoh's not going to be happy about this. Does not want to go to the afterlife in a porta potty, understandably. I'll put a little door on it. Put a little door right here. That's where you go in. And that's where you come out when you get to the afterlife. Yeah, Pharaoh's not gonna like it. Who wants to go tell him? Yeah. Here it is. There we go.